Hey, what's up, guys? It's Manny and Ty over here from G&M Studios, and we are here to show you guys a song that we've been working on, right?
Yep, for a client.
Yes, for a client. He's doing some hip hop stuff, and he wanted some sort of ambient beat, and we wanted to show you guys what we did here. So first off, we're gonna show you a little clip of it, so you guys can see exactly what it is. Do you want to start it from like the hook? Or from the beginning.
Yeah.
All right, so check it out. This is it. Then over here it goes to the hook. So yeah, basically that's what we have for that track. Now, a mistake that a lot of people do, including ourselves, is we tend to overproduce tracks. You know, so Ty, you can tell them the little story about what we did here.
We originally had piano. Let me turn it back on over here. And we originally had strings as well when the hook came in. And we went through so many renders of this trying to make it fit and whatnot. I'll show you what it was with the piano and all that.
By the way, the piano's not quantized yet.
And the hook especially is where it got bad as well.
Listening back, it's like here.
So anyways, we tried everything we could to make this fit. Like we had some crazy EQ. Well, not too crazy, but I did go crazy as well. I was like cutting frequencies all over the place and trying to make it fit and whatnot.
Yeah, well, basically what happened was because it wasn't fitting, we were, like he said, trying to EQ the heck out of it and make it fit. And then we were like, maybe let's try a minimalistic approach. And we
Just muted it.
First we changed all the EQs and tried simple EQs. It still didn't work. And then he just muted it and it worked. So yeah, sometimes you don't have to go crazy.
Especially for a track like this.
Oh, most definitely for a track like this. You don't have to go crazy to like make it sound solid. But yeah, so we thought we would go step by step, basically showing you guys some of the plugins that we used, as well as
approaches to mixing. All
exactly that. Some tips and tricks and whatnot. So first of all, the drums that we used, we used some from the Hit Kit sample pack, but we completely like changed them, like all of them. We mixed everything.
Pitch shifted some,
EQ'd some, like
stacked them as well.
For example, look at the kick. Like it's got Q4 here, took off a lot of that top end.
That EQ is just so we could see the fundamental of the kick.
Yeah, that's right.
Every kick is tuned to a certain frequency. So, for example, this one's tuned like around like 90-ish hertz. If you play it, you'll actually see here.
There you go.
You can see the peak of the kick right there. And I just use this as a tool to help place it in relation to the bass. That's all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because a little tip is if you have the same frequency on the bass that you do on the kick, sometimes it like stacks itself and it's like way too overpowering. So sometimes it's best to like either mix the kick under or above the bass, to make sure that there's room for everything, or else you're gonna have just way too much in that frequency. You could do that by cutting in certain spots. I think we cut over in the bass. If we look over here, where's the bass? Lost it. Ah, here it is. So there's a lot of.
It's gonna be that
here.
first EQ.
Boom. No, it's not.
Yeah, no, that's it.
Is it?
Yeah, we cut up to 70, but there's also more cuts, I think, in that one. Yeah.
Here it is. Boom. That's a huge cut right where we said that the kick fundamental is. Just to make some room. To make some room for that to fit right here. And you see, especially with the Fat Filter Pro Q, like, it's kind of transparent to the fact that you don't really hear too much of the difference in the actual instrument, but it does make room a lot. Like, here's the bass without, and here's the bass with.
Yeah, it's a little too boomy now.
It really is. So there, it made some space, and it fits, so it works.
So I also didn't place it directly over the fundamental. If you see it here, it's 189 instead of like, let's say 100 or 90. But if you see, we have a wide Q here, so it actually is sucking out. Like, let's see, right about here, you could see underneath right there, it's 100 hertz right here. So it's still taking out some 100 hertz. And honestly, I just hate 200 hertz. It's a freaking boomy frequency, so I sucked out tons of that as well.
Yeah, so what else do we have? Oh yeah, so basically on the kick, on the drums, we changed a lot. Like, here is the compressor that we used for the kick as well to give it
A little more attack.
A little more attack, because I took out a lot of the high end. I didn't want it to sound the way that the sample actually sounded. See, I wanted more of like a subby bass. Here's without it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a metal kick right
Exactly. So we took out that top end, and at the same time, when you take out that top end, which is basically the clip, not the clip,
Click.
the click. It's the click of the kick. You take out a lot of the attack, so we used the compressor over to compensate for that attack. And here's without the compressor. With, not sure if you can hear, but it brings
very
out,
subtle.
Yeah, it brings out a little bit of the hit. By the way, this is just a tip that we use. Like, not everybody has to do it this way, but if you notice, all our faders are pretty much at 0 decibels. Don't mind these. They're muted, and so are these. We don't use those. But we keep them usually at 0 decibels because we use the faders mostly for automation to make sure that if there's like volume fades or like rises or drops or whatever, then we use those for automation and only touch those for that. But all our bass volumes, if you notice on all our tracks, we have the L1 limiter, which is a waves plugin. You can pretty much, if you don't have waves, you can pretty much use any limiter. But what we do is we keep the volume low on the actual input signal, and so it doesn't touch here, and then we just use this as our volume. See the out ceiling? What was it? -3.2.
I thought it was -2.2, but whatever.
Whatever, we'll figure it out. So that's basically what we use so that we don't have to touch the faders, and we use that as our main volume. Now for the snare, that's my favorite part. I love doing snares. Here I got 2 different snare samples, and what we did, if you notice, they're only routed to this one bus right here called snare, both of them. And that's where we do all the main mixing. So I got this snare by itself, and and we high passed it there and played with the volume a little bit. And then we got this snare and we low passed it there. So basically what we did is I found a snare, which this works really well when you use a 909 snare and when you use a real snare, a real sample. So what I like to do is I like the top end of the 909 because the 909 gives kind of like a
crack.
Yeah, it's like a fuzz at top, and I like the top end of it. So that's why I went ahead and I took out all the bass of it and just kept the. Now what I did is I like the low end of the real snare because it's kind of like poppy.
It's more body.
Exactly, way more body. So what I did is whatever I left on the 909, I took out of the real snare, and then you get this kind of sound.
Play them one by one.
Yep. So that's the top end. Sounds horrible.
Sounds like I'm swatting a fly.
Yeah. And here's the bottom end.
Sounds muffled.
Exactly.
But together.
You get both the low end and the high end, and it's a really tight sounding snare, especially because you can control the volume, like how much high click do you want. Like that's just too much in my opinion, so I cut it down. You know what I mean? This is what it would sound like without any of the EQ. It's so bad. So you get two sounds. So basically when you're searching through your samples, you're like, hey, I like that sound. And you can either use that sample by itself, or you can like certain parts of that sample, like the high end or the low end, and you mix them together to create a whole brand new sample that sounds nothing like
there's
the original one.
Generally two parts to a snare. There's the crack, which that's generally like what cuts through the mix.
Yeah, that's
and then
what you
there's
hear.
also the body of the snare, which like if you're listening to a mix loud, that's kind of like what hits you in the chest and gives the snare power.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of the same concept with the kick as well. We didn't use too much in the kick, but especially if you're using other mixes where you want a really punchy kick, not kind of like a subby, dull kick like we
metal,
did in this track.
Perfect example.
Exactly. You have two parts where you have the actual punch of the kick, which is like the booming part, but at the same time you also have the click up top, where in fact that's when you're listening to a song on your phone. I think this is the best example. When you're listening to a song on the phone, there's no bass, so you're not going to hear the body of the kick, but if you can hear like ticka 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 ticka, that's probably up the higher end with the click. So that's basically what you'll use. Now when I cut over here, I just want to make a note. I didn't cut too much, so there's still a little bit of click there. It's not that it's just sub, it's not just way down here. I left a little bit of high end, so you can still hear it, for example, on your phone, and you can still hear the click. So now on top of that, I didn't want to just keep the snare the way it was. I wanted something more slappy as well, so I used a clap. And for this particular track, I used more of like a dirtier clap. You see? It's not that pretty. Sounds like a crack. So when you mix that with your snares, you get a little bit of like a dirtier sound. Here's without. Here's with. Without. With.
That's way too sterile without.
Yeah, basically. So this gives it kind of like a, I guess because it's like dirty and cracky, it kind of gives it almost like a slap reverb effect, because this is really dry. And this has kind of like a slight delay to it. See what I mean?
Mm.
So that's pretty much it for like the snare. And you get this kind of sound with the kick.
What about the snare bus? Did we talk about the snare bus?
We did not, actually. So basically, once we mixed these together, we brought it down to a snare bus. And you can talk about the snare bus.
All right, so snare bus, we have a compressor. It's not doing much. It's just helping enhance the transient, which is like the initial spiky hit of a snare. Let me show you what that is for a second. Where's snare here? So if you look at a snare, the waveform, it's super fat in the beginning, and then it just dissipates.
Yep.
So what the compressor does is I set it to a slow attack, which means it has a slow reaction time to clamping down on the signal. So when it reacts slowly, let's say it clamps down right here, it's going to make everything at this point way quieter. So this basically increases the dynamic range of the snare and makes you feel, or you perceive it to be punchier, basically, because this fatter part is now larger compared to the tail end of it. Then I think we're just high passing just to make sure it doesn't interfere with bass or the kick.
Once again, it's about making room for everything. Where, we already saw the EQ for the bass and the kick is way down low, so we want to try and high pass everything. Besides that doesn't have like a primary bass, so there's no like mud there bothering in the way.
You have to be careful about it too, though, because if you do it too much, you create like a disconnect between all your instruments. Yep. No live performance or live music is performed that way, where like you're gonna have a total absence of low end from every instrument. So if you did that on a recording, of course, it'd sound very unnatural.
Yep.
Then we have this Valhalla Room plugin.
We love this plugin so much.
Yeah, Valhalla makes the best reverb plugins. This is doing a slight room reverb on the snares, so we'll show you what that sounds like with and without.
Not only that, but it's also, if you open it, it's the Snare Lively Small Room preset, which is pretty much nothing. Like, you're not gonna hear like this big like pa pa, which especially in a track like this, you don't want a huge snare, or you don't want a huge reverb altogether. You want more of just like something depth to make it feel less fake.
Yeah, it's just depth. It's just creating space. That's all. It's very subtle.
That's without it. Look how dead it sounds.
Yeah. Just creating space. That's all. Yep.
Basically.
All right, cool. So that's Snare Bus.
Next, we went to the hi-hat. Now, the hi-hat, obviously, they're all samples. We didn't use any real instruments or anything. But I wanted something that sounded slightly real in this kind of track. And we got this. So obviously I used the closed hi-hat plugin, and I used an open hi-hat plugin. And if we go over to the hook, over here, there's another hi-hat effect that's kind of like tss, 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 coming in on the offbeat. And it gives it kind of like a bounce. There's nothing too crazy about the hi-hat. You can't get too crazy in this kind of track. Now, we did do some EQing here. You can explain that, Ty.
Okay, initially on the first couple of renders of this track, we had a lot of top end. And hi-hat was the culprit. You may not have to do this with every hi-hat, but with this one, it was just extremely bright up top. Let me show you what this sounds like. It's very sharp. Way too sharp. In the context of the mix, let me play it. It's painful to the ears when you crank it up. See, it sticks out like a sore thumb.
Yeah.
So, because this is more of like a dark ambient track, you don't want piercing hi-hats through it. Like maybe if this was more of like a louder, more energetic track, that might have been fine, but for this, not so much. So yeah, we just created some space in the low end to make sure nothing here was interfering with bass and kick.
Same concept.
Then of course just taming the high end, and that's it. Setting the volume with the limiter, and then
some reverb.
just reverb to create space. That's
Now
it.
we only kept it at 8.8%, but we did use a large hall preset, so it did have a lot more tail and more ambience to the hi-hat. So you get versus this, because that just sounds so fake.
Yeah.
There, it just pretty much blends it together, so you don't have it standing out too much.
Yeah, and you have to think in the context of the track too, because we also have a harp and a woman singing in this song that have very long reverb tails. So if you create everything to be super sterile, it's going to feel very disconnected. It's not going to feel like they're playing together.
Correct. Now, in the bass, so here it is with all the chains. Oh my god. It's a whole different instrument. Without. So, obviously the volume is louder with the chain, but that has to do mostly with the limiter over here, volume wise. But yeah, there's a huge chain to basically change the way the entire thing sounds. So, go ahead.
All right. So first off, this is a real bass guitar, by the way. Well, not a real bass guitar. It's a sampled bass guitar.
It emulates
but if you hear
a
it by
real
itself,
one. Yeah.
there's a lot of attack. In fact, I use this stuff a lot for metal. But one thing you can do to kind of make it subby and fit into a track like this is just high passing everything. Low passing everything down. So I chose 224, and that's just based off of what notes are playing in the bass. It's going to be different depending on like the tuning and the key of the song, so you're going to have to figure that out yourself. But I'd say generally anywhere between 150 to 250 is going to be your cutoff point depending on the tuning. So I high passed up to 70 just to make room in this in the subs, and so that we could turn it up a little louder and it wouldn't be overwhelming in the speakers. Then we explained this part earlier, just EQing out 189, because that's a very boomy frequency. It would probably overtake the track.
Especially with a bass that's so subby.
Yeah, it's extremely subby, and it's limited to hell and back. So I love putting this on my bass. It's called Maxxbass. Believe it or not, it doesn't add extra sub. It actually does kind of the opposite. It adds upper harmonics. So it makes it easier to hear like on smaller speaker systems, essentially.
You can compare them as well.
Yeah. So here's...
That's without.
Oh, yeah.
Plugins.
Right there. So there's with. So it feels kind of weak. And that's not because it's lacking in bass. It's because it's too much bass and it's outside of our audible range of hearing. So this just adds upper harmonics where our ears are tuned to hear a little better. So I chose 80 hertz. That's really where a lot of like the body of a bass lies. So yeah, nothing crazy here. I didn't boost the original bass frequency or anything. I just added in some upper harmonics, and not a crazy amount either.
This is also in the Waves pack, by the way. There's a Waves plugin.
Oh, I cut out more. Yeah.
Well, we cut out more because not only did we cut with the fab filter out of the original sample, but after we added bass with the Maxxbass, we cut out
That's true.
some more.
Yeah, that's probably why.
Yeah.
The upper harmonics can get out of hand as well. Okay, we have two limiters, and there's a reason for that. So the first one, the reason why we have it here is because if you see that bass isn't reaching that threshold, it's not big enough to really limit anything right here. So I had to bring it down to bring it up in volume right there. So now it shows up on this limiter, and now I actually can
Super controlled.
limit it. Yeah. So I'm limiting the heck out of it because consistent low end is nice. You don't want your low end
To be
ebbing
like
in
really
and out.
low.
Yeah. You don't want it to boom in, and you don't want it to like fizzle out at random times. So limiter helps keep that under control. I didn't limit it too much. I could have gone way crazier with this if I wanted to. Like I could put this thing all the way down. Like on a metal track, I would do that probably. But since this is a little softer,
But if you notice over on in the mixer though, like it stays relatively in the same spot, and that's kind of what you want, so that it doesn't like fizzle out. You know what I mean?
Yep.
It's pretty much
And,
it for bass, isn't it?
I played with this release control as well because it affects the tone in a weird way. Hear that? It's like all buzzy.
I don't like that.
So I kind of set it here where I felt like it was nice and round instead of buzzy.
And at the same time, it has some harmonics to bring it out.
That's it for the bass.
Now here we have the piano, but we didn't use that piano
Yep.
at the end. So
Ooh, my favorite.
our
part.
favorite. So here we have Alison. Alison is actually not a real person in this track. The voice that we used
Like
is
Manny's
actually
girlfriend.
a plugin. What?
Nothing. You'll hear it later.
It's actually... What is this? Oh, this is you playing around. It's something else.
I was trying to overproduce the track.
Vocal phrase. Here we are. Yeah, we tend to try to overproduce things, but this is a plugin called Vocalize.
Vocalise.
Vocalise. Really?
Or I don't know.
It's
It could
Vocalize.
be either. Well, I know vocalise
Tomato,
is
tomato.
what we
you know,
call it
or
in school.
Whatever.
Alright.
So basically, it gives you like different samples recorded by different singers and things like that. I think you pick the key, right?
Yeah, down here, but don't mess with it.
No, I don't want to touch it. So you pick the key and you pick dynamics and stuff like that. And then it has, for example, if you notice here on the bottom, like this is all Nelly and then Alison, Bay.
Yeah,
And
our singer
then
of choice.
whatever that is,
Sangyi.
Sunggi. And then you have
Carla.
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 Carla. You know, so basically what it does, it's super cool, and it triggers the most beautiful vocal phrases.
So this is the A minor phrase menu, which is the key of the song, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They have like other ones in here as well. They have like C sharp minor and maybe D minor or something like that. But yeah, we chose A minor since it'd be natural to fit with this, and we wouldn't have to like pitch shift or anything. Just sounds way more organic that way, and I think it paid off. It sounds like a real singer actually sang on the track and just kind of ad-libbed over everything. In terms of EQ, didn't really take much, honestly, to do this.
Obviously, we cut out the low end.
Yeah, cut out the low end. That's generally a like normal move to do on most instruments that aren't kick or bass guitar or
Especially
anything like
vocals.
that. Yeah, especially vocals, because there's a lot of unnecessary rumble in here that just gets in the way of the mix.
Yeah.
You also don't want to do too crazy though, because then it kind of takes out the chest resonance of the singer, and then the singer loses their body, and now they sound like weak and unsupported. Mm-hmm. So I gotta remember why I chose 500. Let's find out. Actually, probably just boost it like crazy and figure out why.
Find a spot where she sings. In the chorus, yeah.
Okay, I remember why I chose 500, because 500, the mid-range is where we had the harp. And I think at the time, the piano as well. I just kind of wanted to dip it. Because I didn't want the voice to be like up in your face present with mid-range or anything. It kind of sounds like radio-y.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of want it ghostly and like ethereal, I guess, was what we were going for. So to kind of help with that too, the second move we made was boosting.
Oh, this is our little secret that we use.
Oh yeah, for tons of stuff. We kind of boosted 12K and up. It's a shelf. Just boosts everything up there. Makes things sound like expensive glass, basically. So
adds breath, adds air.
So let's find a more pronounced phrase, actually, because you won't be able to hear it as much on that. The ending.
Go from here. That has the trigger. Right here.
So yeah, it just adds in a little bit of air without getting in the way of the mix. Like if you went further down, it'd probably be very piercing to the ear with it. So there's almost no content up there except for maybe just air and breath. That's why you can boost it and it's not too big a deal in human voices.
Yeah, definitely. Now here, we used the Glockenspiel. Right? Spiel. A Glockenspiel, which are the little bells that you basically hear throughout the whole song, especially in the intro. You have that. We honestly did not do much to the Glockenspiel, which we didn't add the thunder into the mixer yet. Now, we did add some of that air that we were talking about, as well
just
as
a
take out
little
some
bit.
of the mid. Not too much, just to give it kind of like
Sparkle.
Yeah, this is difference. Oh my
It's
god.
very dull. And it gets in the way a lot.
Yep. And then with that, we have that.
That's like the Faith, Trust, and Pixie Dust.
There you go. That's
like
it.
the Tinkerbell sounding.
Yep. And now this is our Valhalla Shimmer, another Valhalla plugin for reverb, and we like to throw this in a lot of our mixes.
Yes.
It's kind of extra, but it's pretty cool. It's basically a really, really dramatic reverb. It's not like Valhalla Room, where it sounds kind of realistic. Like this one's like really dramatic, and leaves a lot of tail. So this is without.
Just sounds normal.
Yeah, it's normal. And
This
then
takes it to
here-
another world.
Yeah, basically sounds like you're in another realm. Here it goes. See how it adds like other little harmonics and like really high octaves, and it just stretches it out all the way.
I think the best way to demonstrate it is putting it on something like a piano.
True.
And wait a minute. We can't load plugins because if we do, it's going to cut out the audio.
That's true.
We're going to cut this out later.
Yeah. Okay, so basically, the next thing that we have is the harp, which at first it was just kind of like a background instrument because their piano was our primary, but then this ended up turning out to be our main instrument in the entire track, you know? So, what in the world was that? Okay. So we have the harp over here. I'm gonna put it in the chorus. We have this one. Just basically an arpeggio of a chord. But then we also have the main lead over here. Now for the harp, we use the plugin. Where is it? Harp number 1, which
Celtic
is
harp.
yeah, just a Celtic harp. What is the actual plugin name though? Is that it?
Highland Harps by Sound Iron.
Ah, so Highland Highland harps.
It's alphabetized.
All the way down. There it is. So it gives you a few different types of harps and stuff. So we use the Celtic one here for a main lead. And then for harp 2, I believe it's the same.
Yeah, same one.
Yeah, same exact one. It's just we try to put one at the higher end and we put one on the lower end with the strumming so it doesn't get in the way. Now, we added some reverb here, large hall, so it has a longer tail, and we put it at like 21%, so it doesn't sound dead. It sounds a little more real, especially in a track like this. See how it just extends. We did do some cutting because no matter what, every time that you use a plugin that's like an emulator of a real instrument, you're gonna have some frequencies that just make it sound super fake. So you find what's getting in the way of the mix, and then ooh,
Very nasally.
yeah, and you cut it out. There you go. It's a little bit nicer. Now, of course, cut out the low end to leave some space for the bass.
Important note here.
Yeah.
So EQing after the reverb plugin. So whenever you have a reverb plugin like this and it's putting in like room reverb or anything like that, sometimes it'll add in a lot of extra low end to emulate a hall of some sort. So that's why we ran this after and what's it called? High passed. Yeah, high passed everything so to kind of get rid of that like reverb buildup.
Yeah, so you want to kind of play with that depending on the instrument, whether you EQ after or after or before the reverb makes a pretty big difference in your track. So aside from that, here we only use this just to see like where the frequencies are. And that way it helps us kind of like
make EQ decisions. Yeah,
find where we want to cut and things like that. Another thing that we use is called Subtractive EQ, which basically we put a really wide Q and then we bring it all the way up the gain and we like swipe it and find those frequencies that you're hearing that you really don't like. Then we squish the Q and bring it down however you need to make sure it sounds good. Or you can do the opposite, make it a really, really small Q and find it and then bring it down and widen it, so on and so forth. And then, of course, volume. That's it. There's not much to that. Yeah, see, it's not even touching, but the threshold brings it up and the out brings it down. So that's it for that harp. We have some rides here. We did a little bit to the rides. Not too much though.
A good thing to talk about here is the importance of choosing the right samples.
Yes, the first samples that we chose were really ugly, and then we decided to go with something.
Rides
else.
are one of those things you can't like. I feel like you can't use a static sample for. Like using waveforms is super hard for this kind of percussion. I don't know why. I think it's because it has a lot of tail. Rides are very like.
Yep.
Dingy.
Yep.
Hi-hats are easy because they're short.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This one, like, you're gonna make like it because the tail's so long. You're gonna hear all the ugliness if it's ugly, you know. So here's the rides. There's 2 of them. 2 different pitches. And that's it. That's pretty much the only rides in the entire song. But once again, cut out the low end, find the EQs that are messing with the mix, and then cut those out, as well as we did a high shelf to make sure we have a little bit of like twinkle in the top. And then the limiter EQ for volume.
Oh, one other thing as well. I sometimes go crazy on high passing cymbals, especially. Like I think sometimes I can get away going up to like 250 or 500. And I thought this was going to be one of those cases. It's not. Because the track calls for ambience, I guess. Like, you need to create an atmosphere. And when I originally high pass, let me double check what this is set at. Okay, so this is at 100. I originally high passed up to like 500 or something crazy like that.
So bad.
And it kind of takes away from the ambience. Sometimes you do want that that kind of low end, like not necessarily a rumble, but just kind of a depth, I guess, would be the best way.
Which brings another point. Sometimes it's smartest to mix specific instruments inside the mix. So with the rest of the instruments on. Because a lot of times we find ourselves muting and trying to mix by themselves. And then when we unmute it and we play it with the rest of the track, it just doesn't fit, which was the problem. Like, if you noticed, it didn't sound that horrible when we cut all the low end all the way up here by itself. But as soon as we put it in the track, it was kind of ugly. And if we bring this...
It just feels disconnected once you do that.
Yeah, if we bring it up, check it out.
It just doesn't create space when you take all that out.
There you go. And it makes a big difference. It's a lot of the little subtle things. Like I said, this is a very simple track, and so you hear everything. You want to make sure everything sounds good. The strings we cut out, didn't like it. The sub hit, that was fun. So we like to do a lot of cinematic style things in tracks. We were actually just talking about that. And one of the things we did in this track is on these breaks here it is right here. So this break over here as well as this break over here, we added kind of like a sub hit to emulate kind of just like a boom and like explosion, make it really dramatic. This is what it sounds like. And it kind of takes a space as well. Without it, it would just stop. There'd be nothing.
Yeah, it's air. It's not like a crazy sub hit or anything like that. It just feels like air is just being pushed out of the mix, but it's not being like a...
It's not an explosion.
Yeah.
You know? Here's the other example. It's a real dramatic here. See what I mean? Kind of gives a different dynamic, different feeling, really dramatic feeling, that's for sure. And it adds to the ambience that we're trying to go for this track. So that's pretty much it. We just basically left the sample as is and just played with the volume. That's pretty much it. Drum bus. Okay, so if you notice, all these individual tracks, kick, the snare main bus, the clap, the hi-hat, the rides as well. No, we didn't do the rides. The rides were solo.
Yeah, they're kind of their own thing.
Yeah, we put everything to the drum bus. That's basically just another master for the drums. So everything, all the drums have to go through this bus to actually work. If I mute that bus, there's no drums. See what I mean? That's where all the drums are. And then over here, it lets you kind of edit all the drums at once, whether it's volume, like this, because the way it was mixed without this, they were very loud. So we brought them down. As well as here we had Kramer Pi, which is a compressor.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And basically we just played around with the compressor to kind of like bring it all together. Yeah. Glue all the drums so they weren't too separated, because they are separate samples, and you want it to sound kind of solid. Here's without. They just sound like different samples put together as drums, which is horrible. That's what they are. But it'll only sound better with the Kramer Pi here. And that's it. So now we
actually, let me explain the Kramer Pi.
Go ahead.
A little more. So the Kramer is doing, if you look at they have like different meters on here. This is the gain reduction, which that tells you how much it's reducing the volume on certain hits of the drums. So it's not doing tons. You don't need it to do tons. If you do too much, it's gonna pump and it's gonna sound unnatural.
Yeah.
See, like maybe 2 decibels at most. Not doing a lot.
And it's mostly on the snare, really.
Yeah, it's the snare.
The punchiest part.
What that does, it gives everything a more cohesive sound. It keeps things together, makes sure nothing is peaking out of control. Now, there's a special thing with this plugin, and actually, like, tons of wave plugins behave this way. This is modeled after some sort of analog unit. I don't know what it is, but this output here acts sort of like as a drive. So if you crank it, you kind of get this saturation on top of it, which I think sounds amazing on drums. But in order to do that, you have to crank it down as well by 16, since I'm increasing it over here by 16 as well. You can check out the manual for all the different Waves plugins, but they all have little hidden features like this that you may not have thought about. Mm-hmm. You probably wouldn't think that cranking the output of a plugin actually saturates it and changes the sound a little bit, but it does. So whenever you're using a plugin, just be sure to read up on it and make sure you're using all of its features. All right, that's it.
Cool. Yeah, there's, like you said, there's a lot of plugins that have these like little extra things that bring the track to a whole new level, basically. So aside from that, we wanted some sort of ambience, so we just decided to get creative and drown the whole thing in rain. So we got rain plugins, rain samples and things like that, as well as thunder. You can use them both as one sample. We decided to use 2 different samples, just thunder and just rain, so that the rain can go throughout the whole thing and the thunder only comes in when we tell it to come in. For example, over here in the intro, we get some thunder, and over here in this break, we get some thunder too when the track is trying to breathe. So we have this. While the rain it sounds like one ambience. Rain stays. Without the rain, it's a whole different track. Like,
too sterile.
yeah, like it's not horrible, but I always like to add something in the background to make it sound a little bit more real. And then over here in the cut, where we have that big sub hit, the thunder comes in. There you go. And it just gives like a whole different feel to the track. Other examples of things that I put under the mix, I use this one a lot actually. I use vinyl crackle.
Yeah.
A lot. And not just a plugin, like I just literally get a sample of like vinyl. HitKit has some like amazing ones actually that I use. Crackle. I think number 2 is the one I use a lot. Right there. It literally does nothing to the track, really. I put it like really low volume, like way under, and just loop it all from beginning to the track to the end of the track, and it makes a huge difference. It gives it a little bit more of a real feel, I guess, especially because we're using all digital plugins. We're not using anything analog. So it gives...
You got to screw some things up a little bit.
It makes it kind of distressed, you know, like if it's actually going through a tape, you know? And I personally think it sounds cool. Some people don't like it, so they don't use it in their mix, whatever. I think it sounds cool, so we use that. And of course, we're not going to use it here because we used rain instead. Sometimes I've used like beach sounds, like way in the bottom, but it depends on the track, of course. And just to give it realistic ambience, especially in like a cinematic, like ambient track like this. Alison makes such a big difference. And that is that. Now, finally, the last thing that we did here is our master plugin. Our master chain over here. And I'll let Ty explain some of that. It's actually, I think we used a mixture of my master chain and his master chain to get it down.
Actually, not on this track. On another one we did.
It wasn't this track?
No.
Well, I also use the SSL. And I think do I use this one? No, I use another one. Another multiband. But yeah, so I'll let him explain. By the way, this right here is just a frequency monitor. Just so you can put it on the master and see like how much bass there is compared to treble, and make sure all the volumes are kind of even. Obviously, you have to let your ear be more of the judge. Don't mix with your eyes, mix with your ears. Because we thought we had it right, then we rendered it and went to the car, and it didn't sound right. It was way too much bass, way too much high end, and we came back and we fixed those things and made a massive difference. So you can go ahead and quickly explain your master chain over here. Makes a big difference to the track.
Okay, so my general rule with compression, and you probably saw this earlier on other things of the track, is I don't like to do a lot of it. Even if you look back at like instruments like the Harp or like the Singer or the Glock, I'm not adding compressors to everything. And I feel like a lot of people do this, like, oh, you have to compress things to get things loud, and like they prescribe it without a reason. Basically.
Squishing things, basically. Yeah. That's it.
And I feel like you should compress things with a reason. You shouldn't just compress things just because it's the thing to do.
Yep.
So when I do compress, I generally don't like to do a lot of it. I can't really think of an extreme circumstance right now where it would be a good example. But yeah, for this track, not tons of compression. So if you look at the dB meter over here, I'm not doing a lot of gain reduction on this one as well. It's like maybe like 2 to 4 dB. Let's see. I'll take it to a busier part.
Yep.
Not
It's
tons.
about 2.
Not tons. Just glues the track together. Make sure any stray peaks don't get out there. So without... Kind of feels unglued, like especially that drum kit is sticking out like a sore thumb to me.
Yeah.
Everything feels somewhat separated. Then when you add this in, it glues everything together, controls stray peaks. Okay, so my settings. I'm not doing tons of compression. The ratio, which determines like how much it squishes it down once it exceeds like a certain signal, that's fairly low, and that's because I don't want it squishing down the transients, which is like the initial hit of the drums and stuff.
Yeah.
Because then it wouldn't have any punch. It would feel like a very two-dimensional.
And you'll
I
get some
guess.
pump as well, especially on like the bigger hits.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll have another video also that explains compression and gives like examples and things like that. But you don't want to put too much, or it'll ruin the track basically.
All right, and then for my attack and release, I approached this since like tracks like this are very driven by drums. I guess like drums are probably one of the main highlights. Again, you don't want to kill those transients. So I did a slow attack time here. And you'll see, I'll show you what happens if I crank down this attack time. It's going to flatten out the track and make it sound two-dimensional. It just stays in one place and it has no life.
There you go.
And maybe you could get away with 10 if you didn't want that much transient in the track. But even then, I still feel like it still starts to pump. And
Yep.
This is the most transparent to me. So that's that. This is... I need to see what this is doing. Okay. So this is preventing a crazy amount of buildup in the low mids, which that's the frequency where if you crank it up, it's the one that tends to give you a headache, basically. And it can build up really quick. So especially in reverb-heavy tracks like this, you kind of want to make sure that's under control. I'm not doing crazy amounts of limiting with it, just when it exceeds a certain amount, it just kind of pushes down on it a little bit. And that's all this is doing. It's not doing anything else, just controlling low mids. Then I have the maximizer. This basically makes everything super loud. We didn't make this track crazy loud. I feel like it didn't need to be.
Yeah.
We could have, but there's not really a need. So we're using IRC4 on this limiter because it's the most transparent to my ears. Just increasing the volume by 10 dB. So this ceiling output right here is pretty important. We put it to 0.3. Because when things approach 0, they can sometimes distort, even if they don't go over. Let's say you're listening on a cheap system with bad converters or something like that. Sometimes the signal can distort if it hits that 0 point. So I put it at 0.3 just to be safe.
For those of you who don't know what a ceiling is, by the way, in a maximizer or a limiter, which are basically like a really strong compressor, the compressor kind of like puffs the transient down a little bit, kind of like pushes a little bit. Well, when you have something so strong, the ceiling, what it actually is, it's literally that. It's a ceiling. So when the signal tries to go up, it like crashes it. Like it doesn't let it go past that point. So no matter what, no matter how loud we put it, it's not going to go above 0.3 decibels. Even if we squish it to hell, like it won't do anything. So
then there's a setting here called Stereo Unlink. What it does is, since this is on the master track, it has two sides to compress. It has the left and the right. So the Stereo Unlink basically lets this plugin compress each side individually. This is tricky sometimes because it can cause like weird stereo image stuff. Like sometimes it'll make things sound weird and phasey. So you have to be careful with this, especially if your track is kind of lopsided on one side, which I think generally mixes don't end up that way unless you're putting something crazy like a bass guitar on one side or something like that. I don't think you should have any issues.
Well, then again, at the same time, on this kind of track, we have everything. Although everything is stereo, we don't have anything specific like spit.
Hard panned.
Yeah, hard panned anywhere. For example, when I do a pop track and I put a lot of synthesizers in there, I usually fill in those sides and I hard pan almost everything. So I have like one arpeggiator synthesizer, like hard pan to the left, and then another one hard pan to the right, and it's kind of like taking space. This probably wouldn't work very well in that case, depending on the track, because you're going to have different things on both sides, and you may have some weird kind of like bouncing from side to side when it comes to your ears. But we don't have anything like that in this track.
Yep. And then transient emphasis, that just brings back in some of the, I guess, crack from the drums. So it feels kind of flat after you maximize it. I'll show you what it sounds like without it. And it feels like, to me, like the kick and snare aren't poking through enough. So I put this on, brings it back in. Now it feels like the kick is making it past the speakers to my ear. Before it felt like it was trapped behind. And I didn't do a crazy amount because this is an ambient track. So you don't want like crazy drums like cracking in your ears and stuff. Maybe like if this was a metal track or something like that, that'd be fine, or something more energetic. But I didn't want too much of that, so I set it like moderately, and that's pretty much it.
And that's it for the maximizer and for the master chain as well. You don't need to put too much. Obviously, once we put the vocals in here, it'll change a little bit according to the vocals, because that's now something else taking up space in the middle. And you will just tweak and stuff like that. Now remember, a lot of these plugins presets will not work in every single track. Like, it has to be the same exact sample. It has to be the same exact kind of arrangement.
Even the volume makes a difference running into the plugin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the input volume as well as the output volume will make a massive difference on things like that. You can play around with the presets, but it's more important to know why we did the things that we did, so that you can utilize it in your mixes as well, on, you know, what we did here with the attack as well as the release and the threshold and things like that. But I mean, that's pretty much it. Is there anything else? Not much.
I don't think so. I thought you were asking them, but then I realized they can't respond.
No, they can't. So what we'll do is we'll close the video playing from the beginning all the way to the end. Oh, by the way, I faded out the master over here just to, like,
that thing,
you know, close it out. And thank you guys for watching, and we'll be releasing a few more of these. Oh, and another thing, we're gonna start a Patreon, of course, that will include a bunch of extra features as well. For example, like we talked about the drum samples that we made and things like that. We'll be rendering these out as separate samples already processed, so that you have these drums in your sample packs.
You'll get all the stems too. Like, you'll get all the wave files of every track in the song, so you can kind of like put it together. mute and unmute parts.
And unprocessed as well, so you'll be able to practice with the samples.
Yeah, you can practice your mixes
Yep.
as well. With
Changing up the
stems.
mix and uploading your own versions and things like that. And using it for educational purposes and like practicing at home and stuff.
There'll be other stuff in there, but it's to be determined.
Yep, basically. So we'll talk a little bit more about that probably on another video once we get our Patreon set up and things like that. So anyways, thanks for watching. Manny and Ty from G&M Studios. And this is the final product.
Yeah.